Hey guys, tonight we're peeling back the lace curtain on something far more terrifying than Victorian ghost stories, the fate of the single woman in Victorian England. Forget werewolves. Forget Jack the Ripper. The real horror? Being unmarried past 25. With a dowry smaller than your cousin's earlobe and no prospects in sight, you weren't just single, you were doomed. But before we uncover whether you end up wandering the moors, whispering poetry to geese, or serving as your cousin's unpaid governess until you gently fade into the upholstery, do me a favor. Like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this sort of beautifully tragic descent into historical irrelevance. And leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and how single you are on a scale from praying for a proposal to fully prepared to marry your dog for the tax benefits. Now, dim the lights, switch on that fan for some gentle asylum core ambience, and tuck yourself in. Let's pause for a second and ponder the real questions that haunted unmarried women after dark. What did you do all day with no husband and no right to vote? Was needlepoint just competitive self-harm in disguise? How many cats could you reasonably house before someone called the parish? Were you secretly feared, or just pitied so aggressively it qualified as emotional assault? Was there a secret spinster handshake? And most importantly, if your only suitor is Cousin Neville, do you accept your fate or start a secret erotic novel under a fake French name? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1863. Your name is probably Edith, you own 2 bonnets and a dangerous amount of unresolved potential, and everyone is just a little bit concerned about how much time you spend reading. Good luck. The sun peeks through a ruffled curtain onto a room filled with more doilies than hope. You awaken to the gentle thud of your own existential dread, and maybe a distant bell from the local Anglican church. No husband, no noisy children, just you, a tepid cup of last night's tea, and the overwhelming freedom to stay in bed until breakfast is cold again. But there's no ignoring the dawn forever. Even in a room that looks like it was decorated exclusively by your great-aunt's embroidery club. The wallpaper is floral, the air faintly scented with lavender sachets and quiet disappointment. And your slippers, well, one's missing again. It's somewhere between your faded copy of Sense and Sensibility and the growing pile of perfectly ironed handkerchiefs you'll never use, unless you count the occasional discreet weeping over missed romantic opportunities. You stretch out in bed, toes flexing against cotton sheets, stiff with starch and virtue. The house is silent except for the muffled clink of breakfast being prepared by someone else, somewhere else, most likely your married sister or a long-suffering servant. There's a moment where you consider rolling over and drifting back to sleep, but then you remember. Victorian single women may be forgotten, but they are never allowed to be idle. That's what the local busybodies live for, catching you languishing. The first real decision of the day looms. Do you rise and risk running into your mother, who will absolutely inquire after your dreams? Did you dream of anyone eligible? Or do you remain horizontal and cultivate a rich inner life of romantic fiction and pastry-based regrets? Either way, you know you'll have to face the mirror eventually. You steel yourself for the sight. One slightly smushed side of hair, a lace nightcap perched at a questionable angle, and an expression that says, "I have opinions about women's property rights." The next step is to slip into your morning wrapper, a garment specifically designed to allow a woman to appear decent before 11 a.m. without admitting she's given up entirely. The fabric is sturdy. The color is resigned beige. The sash has seen better decades. You make your way to the washstand, where a pitcher of water is bravely pretending to be clean and a bar of soap is worn to the thickness of your remaining hope for a spontaneous proposal. A quick splash to the face, cold, invigorating, and a subtle reminder that this house does not believe in the extravagance of hot water. There's no bubble bath, no cucumber eye mask, and absolutely no singing in the shower. This is the Victorian era. Hygiene is practical, and joy is suspicious. If you want to feel fancy, you might dab a bit of rose water behind your ears and hope it cancels out the existential musk. The room is a museum of carefully cultivated hobbies. books stacked on every surface, half-finished embroidery draped over the armchair, a basket of knitting that looks more like a woolen crime scene than a useful garment. You eye the book of Italian poetry on your nightstand. Scandalous. You read it anyway, hidden between the pages of a gardening manual, just in case anyone pops in. The only real witness is your cat, who has spent the night curled at your feet and now greets you with the look of one who knows all your secrets and finds them mildly disappointing. As you prepare to greet the day, you allow yourself a small moment of rebellion. You open the window a crack to let in the morning air, unfiltered and filled with the faint scent of coal smoke and distant scones. The street outside is coming to life. Vendors, milk carts, the clatter of hooves, and the daily march of other people's children off to lessons. You feel a pang of something. Regret? Relief? It's hard to tell before the first cup of fresh tea. By the time you finally rise, you're fortified for the day ahead. No husband to worry about, no small hands tugging at your nightdress, just the gentle certainty that your day will be exactly as quiet or as interesting as you make it. And as you slip into your sensible slippers and prepare to face the household, you whisper a silent thank you for the undisturbed morning, the mountain of doilies, and the freedom to choose your own adventures, even if today's grand adventure is just reorganizing the button box again. You step into the hall, single and spectacularly underappreciated, ready to begin another perfectly ordinary Victorian day. Let's talk about the perilous solo journey into Victorian fashion. With no maid to lace you up and no partner to rescue you when you inevitably get stuck in your own petticoats, every morning is a test of your flexibility, resourcefulness, and upper body strength. Bonus points if you don't pass out by noon. First, let's set the stage. You, in your chilly bedroom, surrounded by a formidable pile of underclothes, outer clothes, mysterious middle layers, and the distant, echoing laughter of married women who have a lady's maid to do this for them. You stare into the abyss of your wardrobe, knowing that what stands between you and breakfast is not a lack of motivation, but a marathon of fabric and fastenings, so complex it could stump an engineer. Step 1. The chemise. It's the easiest part. Slip it over your head. Try not to think about the fact that you'll sweat right through it by lunchtime. And move on. Next, petticoat number 1. Maybe 2 if it's cold. 3 if you're feeling optimistic about your day's oxygen intake. Each layer adds bulk, insulation, and a faint growing sense of dread. You begin to understand why Victorian houses had so many fainting couches. Then, the main event, the corset. The corset is less a garment and more a test of personal willpower and hand-eye coordination. With no lady's maid to lace you in, it's you versus a labyrinth of eyelets, laces, and physics. You do what every single Victorian woman must. You breathe in, crank your arms back at an angle never recommended by medical professionals, and start pulling. If you're lucky, the laces glide through like a dream. If you're like everyone else, they tangle, twist, and taunt you. You wedge a wooden spoon between your back and the bedpost to gain extra leverage, an ancient trick passed down through generations of determined, slightly hypoxic women. Corset-laced, you pause for a moment. Are you still breathing? It's not clear. Your ribs feel oddly decorative. Your waist now belongs to the house of squeezed internal organs. And you remind yourself, this is the price of respectability. If you drop anything now, you face the real Victorian challenge, the dignified squat and recover maneuver. Spoiler, it is never dignified. Now it's time for the layers. Bodice, overskirt, underskirt, perhaps a bustle if you want your silhouette to say, I'm definitely not hiding snacks back here. Every button is a moral trial. Every hook and eye is an existential question. You realize, as you fumble for the 9th tiny button on your collar, that Victorian fashion was invented by someone who never had to dress themselves. Maybe this is why so many portraits show women looking mildly furious. Then there are the accessories. A modest brooch, gloves for indoors, because nothing says casual breakfast like being ready for an audience with the Queen, and a hat secured with a pin that is equal parts decorative and lethal. Don't forget stockings, fastened with garters that will spend the day either sliding down your legs or biting into your skin like a vengeful squirrel. Shoes, if you can bend far enough to reach them, and your outfit is nearly complete. Somewhere in the middle of this process, you are guaranteed to have a minor crisis. A petticoat twisted, a corset string hopelessly looped, a sleeve caught on a doorknob as you attempt a dramatic exit. There is no one to help. It's you, the mirror, and the creeping realization that by the time you finish, it might actually be time to get undressed again for bed. And yet, despite the daily circus act, there's a strange satisfaction in mastering your own layers. Each buckle, pin, and button is a small victory. You emerge from your bedroom slightly breathless, posture ramrod straight, looking every inch the proper Victorian lady. If only your cat knew the price you paid in circulation. As you finally descend to breakfast, you do so triumphantly. You, and only you, have survived the gauntlet of solo dressing. The day ahead may hold its own hazards, but at least you know you can face them in 12 layers of starched cotton and tightly cinched optimism. Well done. Breakfast in the single woman's household is an exercise in quiet resilience. There's no bustling family table, just the soft crunch of slightly stale toast, maybe some cold porridge, and the gentle sigh of resignation as you realize the cat is your most talkative companion. The ritual begins the moment you descend, creaking along a staircase that echoes back every footstep, as if to remind you that you are the only one in the house with anywhere to be. The dining room is immaculate, preserved more out of habit than necessity. The silver is polished, the cloth is starched, and the only thing missing is conversation. Even the clock ticks louder, desperate for some acknowledgement. You settle at your designated spot, a solitary chair at a table that could easily seat 12 if only anyone ever visited. Your breakfast is already waiting, covered with a domed lid for the element of surprise, although the surprise is always the same. One slice of bread, the aforementioned porridge, which can legally be classified as a solid, and tea so weak it's basically hot water with trust issues. You glance at the cat, who jumps onto the nearest chair, giving you a look that says, "You're lucky I even showed up for this." If you lived with relatives, there might be the faint sound of shuffling from another room, perhaps an aunt reading a devotional or a cousin writing yet another letter to her suitor in Bath. If you live alone, your main companions are your own thoughts and a growing awareness of how many teaspoons you possess. Breakfast is less a meal, more a meditative state punctuated by the faintest hope that maybe today will bring something different. It won't, but hope springs eternal, like dandelions and the number of embroidered napkins in your sideboard. You glance out the window. Outside, a world of carriages and delivery boys is just beginning to stir. Inside, time moves more slowly. Every bite of toast is a reminder of how long bread can technically remain edible, if you're determined enough and have low expectations. You mentally make a note to write to the baker. But then remember that writing to the baker is dangerously close to flirting. And in Victorian England, flirting can only end in marriage or scandal, both of which require far too much energy for this hour. Occasionally, there's the thrilling adventure of opening a jar of marmalade. Victorian marmalade is an unpredictable substance, part preserve, part hazard, always threatening to weld itself permanently to the bottom of your spoon. You spread it carefully, not for the taste, but for the colour, a small, bright rebellion against a world of beige. There is, of course, the newspaper. The Times, folded neatly by the servant, or by you, if you're both master and staff in one, contains all the news fit for digestion at this hour. Shipping arrivals, society engagements, and the latest advice column. You read them all, savouring every accidental typo and morsel of scandal, because in a single woman's breakfast routine, the agony column is just as nourishing as the porridge. Sometimes a letter arrives. More often it doesn't. When it does, it's usually from a married friend, updating you on the latest in child-related disasters or asking, "How are you keeping busy these days?" As if not married were a full-time job. You consider writing back something witty, but you settle for a polite acknowledgement and a well-deployed undercurrent of sarcasm. Even your correspondence is an exercise in Victorian restraint. The cat finally loses interest and wanders off in search of better company. You are left with the last dregs of tea and your own thoughts. You toy with the idea of making a second cup. But remember the household economy. One mustn't squander the good tea leaves before the afternoon. Moderation, after all, is a virtue, especially if you want the vicar to keep his peace. Breakfast ends as it began, quietly and without ceremony. You collect your plate, stack it in the scullery, and pause for a moment in the silent kitchen. The day stretches ahead, vast and uncharted, punctuated by more rituals of solitude, small acts of courage, and, if you're lucky, a fresh loaf tomorrow. You scan the newspaper for news, scandal, and if you're honest, a secret hope that someone else's daughter has failed at courtship even more spectacularly than you. Of course, the agony column is just there to remind you what you're missing. The day's paper arrives with a thump on the doormat, signaling that somewhere in the world, things are happening. Probably to other people. You retrieve it, if you're lucky, before the cat uses it as a new sunbathing mat, and settle in at your usual chair, tea in hand and anticipation in your heart. The newsprint is smudgy, the ink faintly perfumed with disappointment, and the pages crackle ominously as you unfold them. You begin, as always, with the front page. Political intrigue, parliamentary squabbles, some foreign duke has scandalized Paris again, and the price of tea is up. You absorb all this with the calm detachment of a woman whose biggest excitement last week was finding a forgotten toffee in the back of a drawer. You sip your tea, more interested in the weather forecast, which, in true Victorian fashion, is both wildly inaccurate and somehow still manages to shame you for not taking an umbrella everywhere. Next up, the society pages, where the fate of your reputation hangs in the balance alongside the fortunes of distant cousins you only recognize by their disastrous engagement stories. You scan the names for anyone you know, especially the girls you used to see at dances who are now Lady So-and-so or Mrs. Probably Smug. Their triumphs are announced in elegant italics. Their failures, if the editors are feeling generous, are described as taking an extended tour of the continent for her nerves. You linger over the notices of upcoming balls and charity events, feeling a faint, familiar twinge of FOMO, fear of missing out, Victorian style. You can practically hear the distant sound of dance cards filling and parasols twirling. Somewhere, in a grand candlelit room, someone is waltzing. And it's not you. You wonder if they're truly happy or just trapped in an endless sweaty loop with a man who thinks small talk about the price of coal is a seduction technique. Then come the wedding announcements, those cheerful little reminders that someone, somewhere, is waking up this morning with a new ring and a husband who probably snores. The descriptions are glorious. The bride wore a gown of cream silk, tastefully adorned with pearls and a look of mild terror. You try not to judge, but you can't help but compare. Lace trim versus your nightcap, peonies versus the questionable state of your geraniums, blissful nuptials versus last night's dream about accidentally marrying the vicar. If you're feeling brave, you venture into the agony column, that dense thicket of public-private confessions. There, in anonymous ink, are all the troubles you're not supposed to have. A lonely in Leicester Square, desperate for companionship, hopeful in Hampshire seeking advice on recalcitrant bachelors, and spinster in Saffron Walden asking whether it's too late to learn Italian and run away to Venice. You read their woes, feeling both superior and strangely comforted. At least you're not alone in your solitudinal melodrama. The advertisements offer a little comic relief. Hair tonics promising to restore the bloom of youth, with the subtle side effect of turning your scalp purple. Miracle corsets designed by French physicians who have clearly never tried to dress themselves, and a travelling mesmerist who can cure heartbreak, guaranteed. You're tempted, mostly by the mesmerist, and only because you imagine the look on your aunt's face when you announce you've been cured of the urge to marry entirely. As you fold the paper, You take stock of your emotional state. A little envy, a dash of schadenfreude, a pinch of hope, and a heaping spoonful of at least my name isn't in the scandal section, yet. You set the paper aside, reminded that in the great ledger of Victorian society, being a single woman means never quite knowing if you're winning or simply playing a different game altogether. With the morning news consumed, you glance at the cat, who has in fact claimed the society pages as her new resting place, and rise to face the day. If nothing else, you have a head full of stories, a list of weddings to avoid, and a renewed determination to someday, somehow, make the agony column for something truly interesting. The morning's mail brings another wedding announcement, baby photo, or, if you're lucky, a desperate plea from a friend married to a man with the personality of unbuttered toast. You read between the lines and wonder who's truly winning here. It's a daily ritual, this slow walk to the vestibule, where a neat pile of correspondence waits to test your emotional resilience. You pause, steadying yourself for the possibilities, a cousin's watercolour of her 6th child, all cheeks and future disappointment, or perhaps another crisp white envelope, announcing the engagement of someone who once swore off men after that unfortunate punch bowl incident at the Michaelmas ball. You run a careful finger under the flap, bracing for news. The first letter is always cheerful, almost suspiciously so. Dearest Edith, we are simply overjoyed to announce the birth of little Reginald, who already looks just like his papa, except for the ears. Thank goodness. You set the note aside and silently award yourself a point for every euphemism. So like his father is code, for he's already refusing to eat turnips, and angelic disposition usually means screams at night like a banshee with digestive issues. You turn to the next envelope, recognizing the familiar handwriting of your friend Harriet, now Mrs. Gregory, of course, and devoted wife to a man who considers discussing rail timetables the pinnacle of marital romance. Her letter is a masterwork of coded misery and competitive homemaking. She writes, "We spent Sunday afternoon playing chess by the fire. How peaceful it is here." Translation: Gregory fell asleep after lunch. The fire smoked the entire room, and the only piece moving was the rook I threw at his head. The letters are always full of news, new babies, new houses, new reasons not to envy married life. There are stories of dinner parties, which seem glamorous until you notice the careful mention of roast beef, for a change, which suggests that the household budget is tighter than Harriet's corset. Or perhaps the ominous line, "We had such a jolly time with the neighbours, even dear Mrs." Wiggins joined in, which almost certainly means someone had a bit too much sherry and had to be politely escorted home in a wheelbarrow. Sometimes you receive a letter that reads more like a cry for help. "I do so envy your freedom, Edith. Imagine being able to read in the afternoon, undisturbed." You look up from the page at your own quiet room, sunlight falling gently across the rug, and consider the cost of this piece. The constant background noise of societal judgment, the unending game of avoiding matchmakers, and a library that, while peaceful, echoes a bit too much some days. Not all letters are subtle. There are the aggressively congratulatory ones, often from older relatives. "I hear you have taken up gardening, my dear. So wholesome. No doubt your roses will bloom as beautifully as your character, which is so independent." You mentally file independent with all the other code words. Self-sufficient, capable, and not even remotely a marital prospect. The most treasured letters, though, are the honest ones. The ones from friends who confide their secret hopes and mishaps, who admit that marriage is not the fairy tale ending but simply a different kind of story. One friend writes, "If I have to listen to my husband explain crop rotation one more time, I shall throw myself into the compost heap. Write soon. Send gossip." Another ends with, "I miss our walks. Let's never grow up, or at least not too much." You fold the letters, tie them with a ribbon, and tuck them in a drawer alongside old programs from dances and half-written poems. There's comfort in these exchanges, proof that you're not alone in your uncertainties, your laughter, your longing for something slightly more poetic than another recipe for boiled mutton. As you finish the last letter, You reach for pen and paper, thinking carefully about your reply. Will you offer sympathy, witty stories, or simply reassure your friend that despite everything, you're doing quite well, thank you, and you hope her next baby looks nothing like her husband's mother? And as the ink dries, you realize that whether life is single or married, everyone's just doing their best. And sometimes, that's worth more than any congratulatory card. If you're not living alone, you're sharing breakfast with an aunt who asks, "Any news?" every single day. Spoiler, she means marriage proposals, marmalade, passive aggression, and toast crumbs, just another typical family morning. The morning sun creeps into the dining room, glancing off the good china, reserved, apparently, for all occasions involving familial discomfort. You take your seat, careful not to claim the spot nearest the window, which is forever reserved for Aunt Eugenia. She arrives precisely on time, shawl draped and spectacles at the ready, looking for all the world like she's about to audit your life. You know the routine. Pleasantries first, then the daily inquisition. There is a brief, hopeful pause as you butter your toast, never too thick, or she'll comment on extravagance. You brace yourself. The first bite of porridge hasn't even cooled before Aunt Eugenia strikes, voice as sweet as the marmalade she spoons onto her toast with surgical precision. "Any news, dear?" she asks, making direct eye contact over her glasses. You consider replying with a wild story about running off with the chimney sweep, but sense that Victorian irony might be wasted before tea. The conversation is a ballet of careful evasions. You mention the weather, unusually fine for March. The garden, the roses are nearly out, which must mean rain. And, if desperate, the cat. She seems to be enjoying her independence. None of it works. The question hangs in the air, as sticky as the marmalade, waiting for the real answer. Have you been proposed to yet? Or at the very least, have you smiled suggestively at a man of suitable prospects? Every family has an Aunt Eugenia, part Greek chorus, part marriage market analyst, and part spiritual barometer for your suitability as a niece. She dispenses advice with the certainty of someone who's never had to live with the consequences. You know, your cousin Hester found a lovely suitor at the harvest dance. And she wasn't even trying, she offers, as if your entire romantic destiny can be solved by standing near turnips at the correct time. You chew slowly, biding time, as your aunt's commentary moves on to the important business of judging everyone else in town. Mrs. Tottleby's daughter is altogether too forward with the vicar, and poor Miss Pennethorne is terribly clever, but that's no help at all. If there's any comfort, it's that you're not the only one under the magnifying glass. You nod sympathetically, wondering if Miss Pennethorne is secretly living her best life with a forbidden volume of French poetry. The table is a battlefield. You, armed with your politeness, and Aunt Eugenia, wielding questions sharper than the good butter knife. Even the household staff have perfected the art of moving silently, avoiding sudden movements that might draw attention. The only creature immune to the tension is the cat, who perches regally on a nearby chair, cleaning her paws and pointedly ignoring the discussion of marriage prospects. Eventually, the subject shifts. "You must eat more, dear. You're looking pale." You oblige, trying not to wince as the porridge attempts to bond permanently with your molars. Your health is important. No one wants a sickly bride. Another classic. You consider pointing out that you're in robust health and could probably wrestle a small bear, but Victorian women are supposed to be delicate, not feral. By the time breakfast ends, your nerves are as frayed as the family tablecloth. You excuse yourself, plate in hand, making a mental note to practice your diplomatic skills for tomorrow's round. Aunt Eugenia watches you go, her gaze softening for a brief moment. Beneath the criticism, you know there's concern, misplaced, but genuine. She wants you secure, happy, settled, and ideally married to someone who owns at least a small orchard. As you retreat to the sanctuary of the kitchen, you consider the possibility of inventing a secret admirer, just to liven up next week's breakfast. For now, though, you savour the quiet as the clatter of plates gives way to the gentle murmur of the house waking up. Another morning survived, another victory in the ongoing, absurd tournament of Victorian family life. If all else fails, there's always the marmalade. How does one fill an endless sea of free time? You embroider, write letters, and maybe reorganize the linen cupboard for the fourth time this week. The danger of existential crisis increases with each idle hour. Welcome to the subtle art of keeping busy in Victorian England, single woman edition. There are no scheduled meetings, no children to supervise, no estate to manage, just you and the delicate terror of a clock that ticks far louder when it's not counting down to anyone's return. In the background, the grandfather clock ticks out a kind of Morse code for do something useful or perish of irrelevance. You begin, as many before you, with embroidery. It's the universal language of the unattached. You select a sampler, perhaps a favourite proverb about patience or a slightly passive-aggressive warning to nosy relatives. Each stitch is a meditation, each flower or script letter a tiny act of rebellion against boredom. Needlework is both creative and soothing, until you realise you have now produced more doilies than the entire county could possibly use. The sofa is drowning in lace. Even the cat looks concerned. Once your hands cramp and you've started embroidering things that might be secret codes for send help, you move on to correspondence. Letter writing is the main event of the single woman's calendar. You draft careful missives to married friends, cousins abroad, and the local vicar's wife. You comment on the weather brisk, again, your health, excellent in theory, and include subtle hints that you are indeed thriving. If you're feeling daring, you tuck in a pressed flower, because nothing says I'm perfectly content like botanical proof of life. When the post is gone, the real challenge begins. Inventing errands. Perhaps the silver needs polishing. It doesn't, but you polish it anyway. Perhaps the linen cupboard needs reorganizing. You can alphabetize by monogram, by season, or even by perceived emotional importance. The satisfaction is fleeting but real. You create systems and charts that would make the Royal Navy jealous. There's always reading, novels, poetry, and, for the truly bold, the latest periodicals full of cautionary tales about women who strayed from the path of virtue and found only opera tickets and existential satisfaction. You read them all, mentally annotating the bits you disagree with, then promptly forget everything until someone tries to debate you at tea. Household management is another cornerstone of your day. It's your duty to make sure the cook knows that yes, you do still want porridge for breakfast, and no, the scones should not contain a hint of adventure, code for last week's leftover currants. You supervise the cleaning with the gravitas of an admiral inspecting his fleet. You give the gardener thoughtful nods as he explains the state of the roses, secretly marvelling that they survive at all, given your record with houseplants. Afternoons are reserved for good works. You pay visits to the sick, deliver baskets to the poor, and volunteer at the local parish, part charity, part proof of life for the local rumour mill. You're a fixture at every sewing circle, Bible study, and soup kitchen, showing the world that single women are not to be pitied, but feared for their relentless ability to organise canned goods. When all else fails, you invent projects. A new scrapbook, a family tree that may or may not include a secret aristocrat, a survey of every kind of jam ever made in the county, ranked by tartness and potential as an emergency dessert. Some days you simply wander from room to room, ensuring that the order of things is maintained, books straight, flowers fresh, and the mysterious squeaky board in the hallway still unsolved. As the day wanes, you survey your domain. A house in perfect order, a mind only slightly frayed, and the unspoken achievement of having made it through another day without accidentally unravelling the fabric of Victorian society. And so, with the setting sun, you prepare for evening, knowing tomorrow will bring another vast ocean of time, and the opportunity to embroider yet another warning about unsolicited advice. You put on your bonnet and take a walk, hoping for health, virtue, and maybe, just maybe, a scandalous encounter with the neighbour's spaniel. Walking alone is unusual, but you are, after all, a woman of mystery. Let's begin with the preparations. The Victorian walk is not a spontaneous affair. You select a walking dress appropriate for the hour. Nothing too dark, that's for morning. Nothing too bright, that's for attracting the wrong kind of attention. You tie on your most serviceable boots, those sturdy relics that have seen more gravel paths than eligible bachelors. Finally, the bonnet. Tied just so, shielding your face from both the sun and any unwanted scrutiny. If you're feeling particularly rebellious, you tuck a novel into your reticule, ready for a quick read under a shade tree. That's right, you daredevil. Stepping out the door, you brace yourself for the true peril of the Victorian stroll. Being seen. Every window curtain twitches. Old Mrs. Farnsworth is stationed at her usual post, knitting needles clicking like the telegraph as she tracks your progress down the lane. You know your movements will be reported to half the parish by sunset. A single woman out walking, alone, invites speculation. Is she in search of a husband? Or worse, ideas? Perhaps she's run out of embroidery thread and is headed to the haberdasher in a fit of wild independence. You breathe in the air, which is a delicate blend of horse, coal smoke, and the faintest promise of rain. The countryside, or if you're city-based, the nearest stretch of not entirely squalid road, opens before you. The goal is simple. Walk briskly. Look neither too interested nor too aimless, and avoid stepping in anything left behind by the neighbour's livestock. If you're lucky, you may be greeted by a cheerful gardener or a fellow walker, most likely another single woman, equally determined to enjoy nature without incident. The walk is an exercise in both freedom and social navigation. You keep to the respectable paths, nodding politely at passers-by. You're careful not to linger by the duck pond. Last time it ended in a lecture about solitary reveries, or stray too far toward the woods, lest you inspire rumours of Gothic tendencies. Occasionally a gentleman on horseback passes, tipping his hat, an act that will, without fail, be reported back to your aunt by tea-time, exaggerated into a proposal by supper. As you walk, your mind is free to wander, even if your feet are not. You compose letters in your head, mentally rearrange the parlour, and speculate about the mysterious new family that moved in at the edge of the village. Sometimes you imagine yourself in a novel, perhaps as the quietly brilliant heroine, or, on bad days, as the unnamed character who faints dramatically on page 3 and is never seen again. Every outing is an adventure in minor obstacles. A sudden gust of wind threatens to liberate your bonnet. You wrestle it back into place with as much dignity as one can muster when fighting haberdashery in public. Potholes, puddles, and enthusiastic geese all conspire to test your composure. You carry on, determined that no one, especially the local busybodies, will witness you defeated by poultry. There are small rewards. The neighbour's spaniel, true to form, bounds over for a conspiratorial sniff before returning to its own mysterious errands. You pause to admire a rose bush, sniff a sprig of lavender, or rescue a snail from certain doom. These are acts of quiet rebellion. A refusal to let your life be circumscribed by drawing rooms and other people's expectations. Eventually, you return home, cheeks a little pink from sun and effort, heart a little lighter for having escaped, however briefly, the scrutiny of wallpaper and well-meaning relatives. You remove your bonnet, shake out the pebbles from your boots, and survey the world from your doorstep. You have walked, unaccompanied, unashamed, and with your dignity mostly intact. And for a single Victorian woman, that is victory enough. You tuck away the memory for later, perhaps to embroider into your next sampler. She who walks alone walks bravely, or at least bravely enough to survive the spaniel, the wind, and the ever-watchful eye of Mrs. Farnsworth. Calling hours arrive, and so do the neighbours. You pretend to be delighted by their company, while they pretend not to be inspecting your parlour for evidence of madness, cats, or secret lovers. Everyone leaves a little more suspicious than when they arrived. The social machinery of Victorian life grinds into motion promptly at 3 o'clock, heralded by the faint jangle of a bell and the muffled panic of a housemaid who wishes, just this once, she could claim you were out. But you are not out. You are at home, in the most polite and least literal sense. The calling card tray awaits by the door, gleaming with hope and mild trepidation. You brace yourself as footsteps echo in the hall, and the maid's voice warbles, "Mrs. Strickland and Miss Plimpton to see you, ma'am." You receive your guests in the parlour, a room that exists solely for this purpose, and is therefore kept in a constant state of suspended animation. Doilies arranged with surgical precision, cushions plumped to the point of protest, and exactly one book on display, intelligent but not too interesting. The fire crackles. The clock ticks loudly, like a judge noting the precise length of silences. The visitors sweep in, eyes skimming the room with the practiced discretion of seasoned gossips. Mrs. Strickland, armed with a hat that could shelter a small family, offers a smile just shy of genuine. Miss Plimpton, younger and far more dangerous, scans the mantelpiece for signs that you might be secretly eccentric. You invite them to sit. They do, perching delicately on the edge of the best settee, careful not to appear too comfortable. Calling hours are, after all, a test of manners, nerves, and the strength of your antimacassars. Tea is served. The teapot rattles slightly in your hand. After all, nothing exposes a woman's nerves like pouring without dribbling. Conversation begins, timidly, as all Victorian conversation does, with the weather. So brisk today. I do hope it does not rain before I reach home. This is code for I shall leave at the first sign of a cloud. You smile and agree, resisting the urge to check the window every 2 minutes. Topics swirl in carefully orchestrated circles. Mrs. Strickland's gout, Miss Plimpton's cousin's piano recital, the ongoing saga of the milkman's romantic indiscretions, which, if true, would require the milkman to be in 3 places at once. Occasionally there's a dangerous lull, the awkward pause, when all eyes turn to you, as if expecting you to suddenly confess to keeping ferrets in the cellar. You counter with small talk of your own, all the while worrying if anyone has noticed the faint cat hair on the settee. Perhaps the mysterious book on the table, Botanical Sketches of the Lower Thames, was a step too far. You watch as Mrs. Strickland fingers the calling card tray, counting the cards and performing mental math about your social standing. The real conversation happens in the unspoken details. Who glances at the empty chair by the window, reserved for your imaginary fiancé? Who sniffs at the flowers, as if to detect a hint of madness or, worse, French tendencies, and who subtly shifts their skirt to avoid picking up pet hair? You wonder if your attempt at casual elegance, just the right number of half-read periodicals, a slightly wilted but genuine bouquet, has fooled anyone. At last, as the clock chimes the quarter hour, Mrs. Strickland declares she mustn't overstay. There is a flurry of polite goodbyes, and Miss Plimpton assures you she will send along the recipe for her surprisingly robust blancmange. Calling cards are exchanged. A final inventory is taken of your mental stability, and the parlour is restored to silence. You close the door and exhale. The ritual is complete. You have survived another round of neighbourly reconnaissance and mutual suspicion. The calling card tray, now slightly heavier, bears silent witness to your continued presence in respectable society, if only by the thinnest margin. You retreat to the kitchen, where you and the cat, who has emerged, smug, from under the sideboard, share a mutual glance of relief. Visitors are exhausting. At least your secrets, your cats, and your sanity are, for now, still safe behind the polite facade of tea and antimacassars. Until next week, church is where reputations are made, destroyed, or gently withered by gossip. You sing hymns, avoid eye contact with the vicar, and pray your hat is sufficiently interesting to distract from your chronic singleness. The Victorian Sunday begins with a familiar ritual, the painstaking selection of a church ensemble, ideally one that signals both humility and a strong sense of hat-based self-worth. The walk to church is a parade of piety, bonnets bobbing, gloves spotless, and boots freshly brushed. You rehearse your smile in the hall mirror, One that says, "I am content, fulfilled, and absolutely not thinking about the biscuits waiting back home." Arriving at church, you scan the pews for strategic seating. The front is reserved for the truly devout or the aggressively visible. The back is for latecomers and rebellious youths. You choose a respectable spot in the middle, hoping to blend in. No such luck. The moment you settle, Mrs. Drabble from 3 rows up turns to inspect you over her lorgnette, lips pursed with the anticipation of new material for her Tuesday tea. The service begins. You rise and sit, keeping time with a congregation that moves with the synchronized weariness of people who have been at this their entire lives. The hymns swell, some in tune, some heroically not. You focus on your hymnal, trying not to let your gaze wander to the recently engaged Miss Pottlethwaite, radiant in her new gloves and smugness. You sing with the enthusiasm of a woman determined not to look bored, or worse, desperate. Then comes the sermon, a gentle, rambling meditation on patience, humility, or the perils of pride. One that always seems to circle back to the importance of family. You nod politely and feign deep reflection, while privately wondering if the vicar is taking requests for next week's topic on the virtue of mind your own business. Afterwards, the true business of the day begins. Mingling, you emerge into the churchyard, swept along in a tide of chatter. Greetings are exchanged, hands are shaken. Someone with sticky fingers tries to hug you. It's a gauntlet of subtle interrogation. "How are you, dear? Still at home? Anyone special?" You offer up deflections as skillfully as fencing parries, hoping to avoid being roped into a conversation about the many joys of marital bliss, as explained by people whose own marriages have the warmth of a north-facing stone wall. Church is a networking event disguised as spiritual nourishment. Marriage prospects are eyed, rivalries renewed, alliances formed over shared disapproval of the new organist. You linger by the refreshment table, where the biscuits are both a comfort and a liability, crumbling just enough to sabotage your best gloves. Mrs. Into Siege 8, Willoughby corners you with news of her son's promotion, which sounds suspiciously like a polite exile to the colonies. Of course, no Sunday would be complete without a detour into the realm of local news. A new family has arrived. Whispers circulate about the colour of their curtains, positively foreign, and whether the daughter is musical or simply nervous. The choir director is embroiled in a silent feud with the bell ringer, and everyone has a theory as to why the rector's gooseberry bushes have underperformed this season. As the crowd thins, you exchange a final round of smiles, curate your best pensive yet serene expression, and dodge an ambush from Aunt Eugenia, who lurks near the lich gate like a matchmaking spider. Home at last. You peel off your gloves, release your hat from its hatpin-induced captivity, and collapse in relief. Your standing in the community remains, for now, unscathed. Your hat was, as hoped, a distraction. The gossip will turn, as it always does, to someone else's scandal before evening. You've survived another week in the Victorian social network, blessed, scrutinised, and, at least in public, perfectly composed. Your wardrobe is an endless cycle of dark dresses, practical boots, and enough shawls to start a small business. Occasionally, you consider something daring, like colour. Then you remember, you're not here to cause a scandal. The daily experience of dressing as a single Victorian woman is less about personal style and more about adhering to a strict, invisible rulebook authored by generations of women with strong opinions and even stronger forearms from hauling buckets of starch. Each morning you open your wardrobe and are greeted by the most sombre rainbow known to humanity. Charcoal, navy, faded plum, and that one shade of green that can best be described as regretful moss. It's a colour palette designed to say, "I am dignified, responsible, and in no way drawing attention to my unmarried status." You consider the practicalities first: weather, social calendar, and, most importantly, potential encounters with the town's judgment committee. which consists of 3 elderly women and at least 4 pairs of opera glasses. Dark woolen dresses dominate. They're serviceable, warm, and can absorb an entire cup of weak tea without showing a stain. You select one, shaking out the folds, and check for cat hair, evidence of both your domesticity and your secret companionship. Then come the shawls. So many shawls. There's a shawl for every mood. Brisk walk shawl, the house is drafty again shawl, and the formal my cousin's engagement party shawl. Some are hand-knit, others crocheted, all of them indispensable. Draping one over your shoulders is like wrapping yourself in a very soft sigh. In theory, shawls are a fashion accessory. In practice, they're an emotional support blanket with fringe. Your boots are practical, built for walking to the grocer, the church, and the occasional unchaperoned adventure to the post office. Heels are low, both by necessity and by the quiet understanding that no one wants to witness a single woman spraining her ankle on the high street. Your best boots are weathered but trustworthy, with enough resilience to outlast both fashion cycles and rainy Mondays. Now, the accessories. Modest brooches, sensible gloves and hats designed more for camouflage than for applause. Bonnet selection is a delicate business. You want something that communicates, I am respectable without tipping into, I am desperately hoping for a proposal at the fishmonger's. A feather? Too forward? A ribbon? Perhaps, if you're feeling rebellious and have already written your will, there is always the temptation to reach for colour, a cheerful blue, a daring bit of yellow. Sometimes you even hold the fabric up to your face, contemplating the social consequences. But memories of whispered warnings at the sewing circle, she's gone all continental, remind you that fashion risks are best left to widows, actresses, and French women. You sigh and hang it back, reaching instead for another comforting layer of grey. Undergarments are the unsung heroes of the spinster's wardrobe. Sturdy petticoats provide insulation and the faint hope of a fuller skirt, while corsets, though less aggressively laced than those of your married peers, still ensure posture and a daily dose of humility. You might, on a good day, add a chemisette for modesty, a fashion move that says, I have secrets, and none of them involve my collarbone. If a special event looms, church bazaar, distant cousin's christening, you might indulge in a cameo brooch or a pair of cuffs with slightly excessive lace. But otherwise, your style remains steadfastly under the radar, reliable as the Morning Post and nearly as exciting. The end result is an outfit designed to please everyone and no one, least of all yourself. And yet, as you survey your reflection, there is comfort in the routine, the soft armour of practicality and predictability. You may not set trends, but you are always prepared. For a sudden rainstorm, a surprise visit from the vicar, or another day of dignified, low contrast, living in the ever-watchful Victorian world. Besides, you can always embroider a secret message in your hem, something truly scandalous, like, bring me cake. Once upon a time, you might have been out in society. Now, you attend dances mostly as a cautionary tale. The only thing thinner than your prospects is the punch. The Victorian marriage market, despite its romantic moniker, is less like a flower-strewn promenade and more like the sale aisle at a department store after Christmas. All the best things are already gone, the bargains are suspiciously sticky, and the lighting is both harsh and unforgiving. You, with your carefully ironed dress and pre-selected anecdote about the weather, stand at the edge of the ballroom as the musicians tune up and the first brave couples swirl onto the floor. Your debut into society was once heralded by a flurry of white dresses, anxious mothers, and floral arrangements large enough to conceal a small cousin. There were dances, assemblies, and garden parties, all dedicated to the sacred mission of turning eligible young women into even more eligible wives. You were paraded out, introduced, and gently prodded toward any male who wasn't already attached, in exile, or hiding behind the palm fronds. Back then, hope fluttered in your chest. Every waltz was a possibility. every glance across the room the start of a future serial drama. But with each passing season, the excitement dulled. Suitors thinned, proposals became the stuff of rumour, and the entire event shifted in focus from "who will she marry" to "is she still coming?" You found yourself standing near the refreshment table, forming alliances with other survivors, spinsters in training with a shared appreciation for lemon cakes and mutual despair. Now, your invitations arrive with a sense of foreboding. You attend because it's expected, because there is always a faint hope that some newly single uncle or distant cousin's friend will materialize in a cloud of aftershave and dashed expectations. You approach the dance floor with the determination of someone preparing for light battle. If you're lucky, you'll be asked for a quadrille by a shy curate or, failing that, a spin around the floor with the host's youngest son, who is 13 and more interested in the plum pudding than your conversational skills. Your presence at these events is dutiful, your smile well rehearsed. The other guests are equally aware of the stakes. There is an unmistakable subtext to every exchange. Are you still unclaimed? Have you thought about moving to Bath? Have you considered learning the harp? You answer politely, all the while resisting the urge to reply, "Only if I can use it as a weapon." The punch, meanwhile, grows weaker with every passing year, as if the committee is slowly watering it down in sympathy with your fading romantic prospects. The sandwiches are dry, the cakes are stale, and the gossip is both relentless and undercooked. Someone will always mention a girl who made a brilliant match at her very last season, but you know her family had money, connections, or the sort of teeth that make dentists weep for joy. Throughout the evening, you become a convenient confidant for the lovesick and the disappointed. Younger girls whisper their hopes in your ear. Their mothers watch you with mingled sympathy and apprehension. And the eligible bachelors, few as they are, circle the room like wary stags. There is always one who is both suspiciously wealthy and mysteriously friendless. Even your aunt seems to lose hope. By the third set, her matchmaking efforts dissolving into brittle laughter and reminders to keep your chin up. As the evening wears on, you find yourself at the edge of the dance floor, quietly applauding others' luck and practicing your gracious loser smile. You eat another limp sandwich, sip the world's most diluted punch, and console yourself with the thought that at least you have both feet, both gloves, and a houseplant that loves you unconditionally. The night ends with polite farewells, a chilly carriage ride home, and the unspoken agreement that next time, you might just stay in with a book and a plate of scones. The marriage market is closing soon, but you, resilient and slightly amused, are still very much open for whatever life brings next, be it a suitor, a new novel, or simply another slice of cake. Needlework, because it's less controversial than poetry, and stabbing something repeatedly is surprisingly therapeutic. You produce miles of lace while quietly judging everyone's posture at the sewing circle. For the Victorian single woman, needlework isn't just a hobby, it's a lifestyle. Each day, after breakfast, you assemble your tools of the trade. Thimbles, needles of every gauge, a rainbow of threads, and a basket of half-finished projects. Your lap becomes a landscape of doilies, antimacassars, and endless yards of unfinished lace destined to outlive you by several decades. There's always something to mend, embellish, or, if you're feeling subversive, secretly sabotage with a well-placed knot. Needlework is your passport to respectability, your ticket to quiet rooms and even quieter gossip. It's also a highly competitive sport, though no one admits it out loud. The sewing circle is your arena, the parlour your coliseum. You arrive with your current piece, perhaps an elaborate sampler featuring quotes about virtue and restraint, and prepare for a few hours of measured stitching and even more carefully measured conversation. Here, the rules are simple. Sit up straight, thread your needle efficiently, and never, never bleed on the linen. The other women take their places around you, armed with their own work and an arsenal of thinly veiled commentary. "Oh, is that your 5th cushion cover this month?" someone asks. Eyebrows arch to the heavens. I do admire your dedication. You smile, stitch, and plot your revenge by embroidering tiny, anatomically questionable birds onto her wedding gift. While your hands are busy, your mind is free. You listen to the latest local scandal, learning that Mrs. Prassop's scandal, Pennythorne's dog, has run away again, most likely seeking better company, or that the new curate's mother was seen shopping for lace, French lace. You weigh every syllable for hidden meaning. Gossip, like thread, is best when woven tightly and tied off discreetly. Needlework is a discipline, a therapy, and sometimes a protest. When the conversation turns to marriage prospects, you double your speed, producing rows of stitches with the single-minded focus of a woman intent on winning gold at the International League of Passive-Aggressive Domestic Arts. Your sampler soon features phrases like peace in patience and God bless this mess, slogans with just enough ambiguity to make your aunt nervous. Of course, needlework isn't always a group activity. On solitary afternoons, you claim a sunlit window, cup of tea within reach, and lose yourself in the meditative rhythm of fabric and thread. There is power in creation, in turning plain muslin into a masterpiece, or at least a napkin cover that won't scandalize the vicar. Sometimes, when no one is watching, you experiment with patterns not found in any respectable household guide, whimsical animals, secret initials, or even, daringly, a touch of color. Needlework is your legacy. You imagine future generations puzzling over your creations, wondering why one pillowcase features a unicorn and the phrase "regret nothing." Maybe someone will inherit your collection of handkerchiefs, each one an exercise in patience and a silent record of how many awkward family dinners you survived with only your embroidery for company. There is, inevitably, the sense that your skills are wasted on people who cannot tell Madeira from macrame. But you know the truth. In a world where you are measured by your domestic output, your needle is both shield and sword. You may not win medals, but you do win the satisfaction of outlasting every fleeting fashion trend and impressing even the sharpest-eyed aunt with your immaculate buttonholes. When the day winds down, you pack away your work, flex your cramping fingers, and allow yourself a small, victorious smile. You have stitched your way through boredom, judgment, and the general absurdity of Victorian spinsterhood. Tomorrow, you'll do it again, because nothing says I am thriving quite like 300 yards of lace and a sampler that reads, "Minding my own business since 1852. Tea time brings the comfort of biscuits, the sting of casual remarks about your situation, and the relentless parade of other people's children. The sugar bowl gets a workout, so does your ability to fake a smile." The hour strikes 4, and the house is suddenly charged with the expectation of gentle social chaos. The tea tray is wheeled in, a glittering display of teapots, mismatched cups, and enough sugar cubes to send a small Victorian child into orbit. You take your usual place by the window, steeling yourself for what is surely the day's greatest endurance event. The aroma of Darjeeling wafts through the parlour, only slightly masked by the faint scent of anxious perspiration. No sooner have you poured your first cup than the guests begin to arrive, each trailing a flock of offspring like ducklings after a particularly determined mother. There are aunts with opinions, cousins with sticky fingers, and neighbours who believe just popping in is a sacred calling. You greet each one with a serene smile that says, "Yes, I am perfectly content with my life choices," even as your inner monologue debates the merits of joining a silent order of nuns. Tea is poured, biscuits are offered, and the performance begins. Conversation meanders from the safe, the weather, the regrettable state of the mayor's begonias, to the perilous. "So, dear, have you any news?" This phrase is the Victorian code for, "Is there any chance you've snared a husband since last week?" You smile, deflect, and reach for a scone, carbs being the single woman's best defense. The children, meanwhile, are everywhere. One is drumming a spoon against the sideboard, another is licking a biscuit with scientific thoroughness, and 2 more are engaged in what appears to be full-contact embroidery. Someone spills milk, someone else knocks over the sugar. You respond with calm efficiency, passing napkins and offering yet another plate of shortbread, marveling at the child's capacity to consume more sweets than common sense. Between requests for seconds, your guests offer advice like it's the latest trend in wellness. "You know, I read that brisk walks are very beneficial for a woman's complexion," says one aunt, eyeing your unblushing cheeks. "And have you thought of taking up watercolors? I hear artists are all the rage in Paris." You smile, nod, and carefully suppress the urge to embroider "please stop talking" onto the tea towels. No tea gathering is complete without the stories of acquaintances who found love in the most unlikely places. "Did you hear about Miss Carpenter? Met her fiancé in the most unusual manner. His carriage splashed her on the promenade." You feign fascination, privately noting that your last memorable encounter involved an aggressive goose and a ruined hat. These anecdotes inevitably circle back to you, the room filling with a gentle, hopeful silence, as if waiting for your own surprise engagement to burst forth from behind the aspidistra. The second pot of tea is poured, conversation grows louder, and the biscuits dwindle. Your smile stays fixed, your nods become increasingly vague, and you contemplate switching to coffee just for the jolt of forbidden energy. The children are now playing a game that seems to involve hiding your best doilies under the piano. You let them. After all, you have more doilies than regrets. Finally, as the light fades and the sugar bowl is empty, your guests gather their children and their unsolicited advice. Promises are made to do this again soon, and cheeks are pinched with alarming vigor. The parlor empties, silence settles, and you exhale, grateful for the peace and the last remaining biscuit. You sip the dregs of your tea, reflecting on another successful navigation of the social obstacle course. For all its chaos and commentary, afternoon tea is still your favorite time of day. It's proof you can weather any storm, so long as you have enough sugar, patience, and a few secret stashes of shortbread hidden just for you. You are the perfect chaperone, responsible, invisible, and tragically single. Your reward? Sitting in the corner holding someone else's fan while trying not to look directly at eligible bachelors? It's like being a human ficus. It always begins the same way. A niece or cousin arrives in a flutter, cheeks pink, eyes wide, declaring that she's been invited to the most important social event of the season. This could mean anything from a full-dress ball to an afternoon of awkward small talk over tepid lemonade. As the trusted single woman of the family, so trustworthy in fact that nobody fears you'll run off with a suitor, you are automatically conscripted as chaperone. Your mother beams at you with pride and mild relief, and your young charge eyes you with a blend of gratitude and terror. Your preparations are straightforward. You select your most unremarkable dress, fasten your hair in a manner that says, "I am responsible," and arm yourself with all the tools of the trade. A fan to hold, not yours, a handkerchief for someone else's tears, and an emergency supply of hard sweets in case courtship stalls and needs a sugar-fueled restart. You take your position at the event, finding a chair in the corner, just far enough from the action to avoid being a participant, but close enough to provide a sense of moral supervision. There you settle, becoming part of the furniture, a respectable, silent observer, occasionally mistaken for a decorative plant or a surprisingly lifelike statue. The other guests barely notice you, save for the few older women who nod approvingly at your presence, secure in the knowledge that not a single waltz will lead to anything remotely scandalous under your watchful gaze. Your primary task is to witness everything and nothing at once. You monitor flirtations, monitor the passage of notes, and monitor your own ability to remain awake through yet another conversation about the weather. The young couple before you attempt casual conversation, their words tripping over nerves and the knowledge that every gesture is being silently recorded for later discussion at the breakfast table. You pretend to read a magazine, but keep one ear finely tuned to the rhythms of Victorian courtship, the nervous laughter, the accidental brush of gloves, the expertly timed comment about next week's flower show. You become the guardian of accessories. Fans, shawls, reticules, and on one memorable occasion, a pair of lace-trimmed gloves that you suspect were abandoned on purpose. No matter. Your lap is a repository for all manner of feminine clutter. Occasionally you are called upon to provide a distraction, an urgent need for smelling salts, for drama, a sudden inquiry about the latest book, for an escape, or, most importantly, a well-timed cough that prevents an unwise declaration of affection. Your presence ensures that nothing remotely improper happens. Should a young man grow too bold, you deploy the chaperone stare, a subtle but devastating look that could wilt a bouquet at 50 paces. If conversation stalls, you are prepared with stories about distant relatives and even more distant suitors, tales designed to kill romance stone dead. It's a fine balance, encouraging just enough chemistry to keep things interesting, but not so much that a proposal breaks out before the scones arrive. You spend the event in a gentle limbo, never fully part of the proceedings, but always crucial to the machinery of courtship. Your only company is the occasional passing bachelor who glances your way in brief terror, and other chaperones with whom you exchange knowing nods across the room. It is a sisterhood built on shared boredom and mutual respect. At the end of the night, your young charge returns, eyes shining, heart intact, and reputation unblemished. The family is grateful, society is reassured, and you, ever the reliable observer, return home with a lapful of accessories and the knowledge that you have once again fulfilled your role as the silent sentry of Victorian romance. You retire to your room, reflect on the evening's uneventfulness, and reward yourself with a good book and a biscuit. Comforts reserved for those who keep their own hearts safely out of circulation, if only for tonight. A true spinster's refuge. The family library. Here you can read travelogues, poetry, and the occasional scandalous novel, as long as no one catches you sighing at the Italian love poetry. There is a special kind of relief that washes over you as you slip away from the parlour, biscuits in hand, and retreat into the sacred hush of the library. The door closes behind you with a satisfying click, a sound that means freedom, privacy, and at least a temporary reprieve from questions about your plans. The air is tinged with the comforting musk of leather-bound volumes and the faintest whiff of dust, sunbeams filtering through the window and catching on a drifting feather from someone's ancient quill. This, you decide, is what sanctuary smells like, equal parts paper and possibility. You take your place in a well-worn armchair, its upholstery faded, its cushions bearing the gentle sag of generations of bookworms who came before you. Around you, shelves heave with family Bibles, atlases, and endless volumes of the complete works of Sir Walter Scott, bought in a fit of national pride and promptly abandoned after the first 3 chapters. Some of the titles are as familiar as your own name. Others promise distant lands, forbidden passions, or a level of mathematical rigour you will never possess. Reading in the family library is an act of both escape and defiance. Here, you are not the single daughter, not the helpful niece. You are an explorer, a critic, a literary adventurer charting new territory, albeit territory sometimes marked not suitable for young ladies. You reach for a travelogue about India, imagining yourself scaling the Himalayas with only a sturdy umbrella and your wit, or perhaps a slim volume of poetry where you can safely sigh at the Italian sonnets and pretend not to notice how often the hero is described as brooding. There is always a bit of risk to the enterprise. Family libraries are famously full of censored delights, books with dog-eared pages, lines crossed out in neat pencil, or entire chapters glued shut by overzealous relatives. These redactions only fuel your curiosity. You become an expert in detective work, deciphering faded ink and deciphering what made the memoirs of a lady of quality so very dangerous in the first place. On particularly brave days, you smuggle in the latest novel borrowed from a friend, slipping it behind the encyclopedia until the coast is clear. Occasionally your sanctuary is invaded. A sibling bursts in looking for a forgotten Latin dictionary or a particularly elusive board game piece. You close your book with practiced nonchalance, ready to claim that you were just brushing up on geography, nothing more. Aunt Eugenia, ever suspicious, may poke her head in and sniff the air for signs of improper reading matter, her gaze scanning the spines for anything modern. If she finds you sighing over Petrarch, you claim it's for language practice. It's very edifying, you assure her, as you quickly flip the book closed over a page dripping with romantic yearning. When left alone, you indulge your wildest literary whims. 1 hour you are in Egypt with the explorers, the next you are deciphering cryptic verses by moonlight, or embroidering imaginary initials into the hem of your petticoat as you read a serialized romance from the London papers. There is power in the written word. A gentle subversion in letting your mind travel further than your corseted body ever could. You take comfort in the knowledge that every family has its secret readers, ancestors who scribbled hopeful notes in the margins or pressed clovers between pages, as a reminder that there is magic everywhere for those willing to look. In the quiet of the library, your thoughts and dreams are your own, immune, for a time, to the judgments of society, the matchmaking plans of your elders, and even the gentle tyranny of the tea tray. When you finally leave the library, cheeks flushed with poetry and mischief, you carry a little of that magic with you. It's a secret rebellion, one that no one can see, but that colours your world just a bit brighter, and reminds you that even in the quietest life, adventure is always waiting between the lines. Some women collect teacups, you collect living creatures. Cats, dogs, the odd canary. They're less judgmental than society, and at least someone is happy to see you, even if it's only at mealtimes. The companionship of animals is one of the great perks of Victorian singleness, even if it does mean your skirts are never truly free of fur, and there's always a stray feather floating in your morning tea. The house, in all its cavernous respectability, feels just a little less empty when punctuated by the soft patter of paws and the occasional canine snore from beneath your favourite armchair. In a world obsessed with reputations and ring sizes, a pet's affection feels refreshingly simple, no matchmaking required. Your primary confidant is, naturally, the family cat. Empress Josephine, so named for her regal bearing and refusal to obey anyone, ever. She is a creature of velvet paws and needle claws, a queen among domestic animals, and an expert in the silent art of judgment. She regards every visitor with narrowed eyes and sits, tail curled just so, daring anyone to make a remark about your marital status. The best thing about cats is their indifference to social climbing. As long as you provide the occasional saucer of cream and access to the sunniest windowsill, you are, in her eyes, acceptable company. Dogs, meanwhile, offer a less complicated but far noisier love. There is a lapdog, Lady Marmalade, forever adorned with ribbons, and a large, lumbering spaniel, Sir Barksalot, who believes the sole purpose of existence is to guard the garden gate and frighten postmen. The lapdog follows you from room to room, ever hopeful for crumbs, attention, or the odd bit of scandal overheard from beneath the tea table. The spaniel is a comforting presence, his loyalty unwavering even as he snores loud enough to set the crockery rattling. Then there are the more eccentric additions to your menagerie. A canary in a gilded cage, chirping valiantly every morning, a pair of indignant turtles who disapprove of all household changes, and, if rumours are to be believed, a mouse that sneaks crumbs from under the sideboard. You defend these creatures to your relatives, who mutter about spinsters and their beasts as though collecting living company were a sign of moral decline. Your pets provide structure and meaning to the hours of the day. Feeding time is a joyous affair, Empress Josephine pacing in dignified circles, Sir Barksalot howling his opinion on the menu, and Lady Marmalade staging a sit-in until you produce a treat. Walks with the dog give you an excuse to escape both the house and awkward social encounters, and brushing the cat is as meditative as any church service, if not more so. They also make excellent conversational foils. You find yourself narrating daily events to your furry audience, unburdening your heart about the latest letter from a married friend, the shocking state of Aunt Eugenia's bunion, or the unending debate about whether to plant daisies or delphiniums. The canary listens without interruption, the dogs with adoring patience, and the cat with visible skepticism, an arrangement far preferable to any formal tea party. Of course, pets are not without their hazards. Cat hair finds its way onto every shawl and settee, a subtle reminder of your domestic priorities. The dog once disgraced himself in front of the vicar, and the canary is occasionally inspired to join the conversation during moments of absolute silence. You accept these inconveniences with good humour. After all, every relationship requires compromise. There are whispered jokes in the village about the lady with all the animals, but you wear the reputation with pride. Better to be remembered for kindness than for caution, and for laughter and muddy paw prints than for a lifetime spent waiting for someone else to make you interesting. At the end of the day, you curl up with your four-legged friends, comforted by their warmth and their simple devotion. In their company, you find a peace that's undisturbed by society's expectations. After all, it's impossible to feel truly alone when you have a lap full of fur and a chorus of snores to lull you to sleep. You might be single, but that doesn't mean you're idle. Volunteering at the soup kitchen or visiting orphans gives your life purpose and, more importantly, keeps the neighbours from thinking you're hexing their livestock. In Victorian England, charitable works are practically a second career for the respectable unmarried woman. Each day brings new opportunities to rescue your reputation from the slow suffocation of perceived uselessness. By the time you're halfway through your morning tea, you've already been reminded, by both relatives and society at large, that the only thing standing between you and becoming that eccentric woman with the suspiciously large number of cats is a steady schedule of good works. Your charitable efforts begin with the local soup kitchen, a cavernous, echoing room filled with steam, clattering ladles, and the comforting chaos of humanity in need. You tie on your most practical apron, the one with only a few embroidery flourishes, and take your place among a line of similarly inclined women, all ladling out sustenance with the kind of purpose normally reserved for military operations. There is a hierarchy, of course. The younger ladies handle the bread, the more senior matrons supervise the distribution of broth, and you, somewhere in the middle, alternate between offering second helpings and gently policing elbows. The work is both humbling and, if you're honest, rather satisfying. You become an expert at reading people's needs, a shy orphan in need of a smile, a tired mother desperate for another spoonful, an elderly man who wants nothing more than to share a story, and perhaps a second biscuit. In these moments, your own worries recede. For a few hours, you are defined not by your marital status, but by your usefulness, your kindness, and your ability to spread jam on bread with astonishing speed. When soup duty is done, you set off on your rounds to visit the local orphanage. Here, your arrival is greeted with chaotic enthusiasm. Children rush forward to tug at your skirt, hands sticky with whatever treat the last visitor handed out. You organise games, read stories, and attempt to mediate disputes over the ownership of a particularly battered wooden horse. The children are fiercely loyal to you, not because you bring gifts, though the occasional bag of sweets never hurts, but because you listen, laugh, and never treat them as objects of pity. It's not all heartwarming moments and grateful smiles, of course. There are challenges, unruly children, endless paperwork, and the constant, needling sense that no good deed goes unremarked by your neighbours. Charity, in this world, is as much about being seen as it is about doing good. There are always eyes watching, tallying up your contributions, ready to discuss your efforts at the next sewing circle or Sunday tea. You learn to perform compassion with just the right mixture of humility and efficiency, careful not to appear either showy or insufficiently enthusiastic. On weekends, you might find yourself involved in fundraising events, a church bazaar here, a bake sale there, each an elaborate excuse for the local matrons to compete in the noble sport of whose sponge cake is highest. You attend meetings, take minutes, and practice the delicate art of persuading wealthy bachelors to part with a guinea or two for the orphans' Christmas fund. Sometimes you wonder if you should start keeping a tally of charitable hours and compare them with your cousin's attempts at matchmaking. Still, there is real meaning in your efforts. The world is full of people who need a warm meal, a listening ear, or just a brief escape from hardship. And in providing for them, you find a sense of community that isn't tied to a marriage license or a ring. Your charitable works become a kind of family in their own right, a patchwork of faces, stories, and gratitude that lingers longer than any gossip or passing fashion. At the end of a long day, you return home, tired but content, apron flecked with soup and heart a little lighter. Whatever else people might say about you, let them say you were useful. And if, along the way, you saved your own reputation while helping others, well, everyone wins. Dinner alone, the ultimate freedom or the ultimate test of your self-esteem. You learn to savor cold mutton, tepid potatoes, and your own company. Bonus points if you remember to light the candles before dark. The evening meal for a single Victorian woman is a quiet ritual, equal parts practical necessity and existential exercise. There is no bustling family table, no chorus of children's laughter, and no husband to debate the merits of boiled turnip. Just you, a sideboard of modest ambition, and the comforting tick-tock of the grandfather clock marking the passing minutes. You take your place at the table, always the same seat, always with the best view of the fire, or if it's summer, the garden fading into blue twilight. The meal itself is not much to write home about, and that's assuming you even have someone to write home to. Tonight's spread features the familiar classics: cold mutton, a potato that has known better days, and a sad little heap of cabbage that you suspect was boiled not just for softness, but for emotional effect. You help yourself with a deliberate lack of ceremony, grateful at least that there's nobody here to criticize your appetite or your table manners. Conversation, such as it is, tends to be internal. You might congratulate yourself on successfully navigating another day of social expectation, or perhaps replay the morning's letter from a married friend. Was that a subtle dig about your independence, or just a poorly worded compliment? Occasionally you catch yourself commenting aloud about the quality of the gravy. The cat, never one to miss an opportunity, appears as soon as you do, winding herself around your chair in hopes of a tidbit. You oblige, and now you are two, woman and feline, both happy to avoid the bland potatoes. Dining alone means you set the pace, no waiting for others to pass the butter or launch into a lengthy monologue about parish events. You eat as quickly or as slowly as you like. Some nights, you finish your plate in 5 efficient minutes and retreat to your book. Other nights, you linger, watching the candlelight flicker and pretending you are at a grand hotel, with room service and orchestral accompaniment just out of sight. You are free to indulge in little habits that would scandalize a family gathering. You read at the table, propping your book open with the bread basket. You hum, softly, the tune of a waltz from a long-ago dance. You experiment with new ways to arrange your napkin, inventing a folding technique that will never catch on. Once in a while, you might even attempt to recreate a favorite recipe from the family's ancient cookery book, only to discover that a goodly handful of lard is not, in fact, a scientific measurement. But dinner alone is not always idyllic. There are moments when the house feels too large and too quiet, the clock's steady beat echoing in the emptiness. You wonder, not for the first time, if tomorrow you'll invite a neighbour or perhaps dine with your spinster friends, where the laughter comes easier and the mutton is mercifully absent. Or perhaps you'll simply set another place for the cat and call it a gathering. As you clear the table, you reflect on the curious mix of solitude and satisfaction that accompanies the spinster's dinner. There is melancholy, yes, but there is also peace, a gentle acknowledgement that, for tonight at least, you are answerable to no one but yourself. The dishes clink softly in the scullery, the last crumbs swept away by candlelight, and you feel quietly triumphant. You end the meal not with a toast, but with a quiet nod to the clock, acknowledging another evening survived with dignity and, mostly, good humour. And as you extinguish the candles and retire to the library, you promise yourself that tomorrow's dinner will be warmer, the potatoes less tragic, and your company, whether human or animal, no less dear. Evenings are for hobbies, reading, or knitting socks no one will ever wear. You might try your hand at a little piano or spend an hour reflecting on your place in the universe. The void is never far away. Once dinner plates are cleared and the house has settled into its nightly hush, you enter that most mysterious phase of the Victorian day, self-amusement. There are no Netflix queues or endless doom scrolling, just you, a flickering fire, and the timeless question, what now? The lamp is trimmed, the curtains drawn, and the evening stretches before you, as open and mysterious as a Bronte moor. You start with the classics. A well-thumbed novel rests on your side table, a comfort in both familiarity and slight mustiness. Tonight, it's Austen, or perhaps Wilkie Collins, if you're in the mood for a little melodrama. You curl up in your favourite chair, shawl drawn close, feet tucked beneath you for warmth. You read with one eye on the text and the other on the clock, timing your chapters to the pace of the creaking house. Every so often, you pause to listen to the wind or the distant sound of someone dropping a chamber pot on the next street over. This, you tell yourself, is peak entertainment. Knitting is the other star of your solitary show. You keep a basket of projects close by, each at a different stage of unravelling. There are scarves with mysterious holes, socks that seem destined for mythical feet, and a patchwork blanket whose colour scheme defies all natural law. The repetitive clack of needles is as soothing as any lullaby, and each completed row is a small triumph over the encroaching boredom. Sometimes you even knit gifts, hats for orphans, mittens for the church bazaar, or elaborate tea cozies that elicit polite confusion from friends and family alike. On particularly energetic nights, you approach the piano, that stately behemoth dominating the drawing room. You select a gentle piece, something contemplative, never showy, and play softly, fingers stumbling only occasionally over the trickier passages. Your music drifts up the stairs, mingling with the scent of old books and candle wax. It's unlikely anyone else is listening, but the performance is for your own pleasure and, perhaps, the ghost of a romantic hero or two. Yet, for all your industriousness, there are stretches of evening that simply refuse to be filled. You find yourself staring into the fire, counting the cracks in the ceiling, or contemplating the existential fate of the dust bunnies beneath the sideboard. Victorian life is filled with ritual, but solitude is the master of ceremonies. You let your mind wander to the mysteries of the universe, to what life would have been like had you married the vicar, or to the unsolved riddle of where all your good teaspoons have gone. Sometimes you write letters to friends, half-finished poems, diary entries that veer between comic resignation and genuine longing. Your handwriting gets loopier as the hour grows late, your sentences filled with observations on the weather, the cat, or the philosophical merits of lemon biscuits. You keep a special pen for these moments. A tiny act of rebellion, since it was technically a birthday gift for your cousin. If restlessness prevails, you might rearrange your bookshelves by colour, theme, or how likely the characters are to end up in a tragic love triangle. Or you might simply pace the hallway, listening for the settling sighs of the old house. The emptiness can be daunting, but you find ways to turn it into something peaceful, something that belongs only to you. Eventually, as the fire burns low and the needles click slower, you gather yourself up and prepare for bed. The void may linger at the edge of your thoughts, but you have survived another evening, soothed by stories, small creations, and the silent companionship of your own steady company. Tomorrow will bring its own amusements and its own mysteries, but for now, the quiet night is yours. There's always that story, the proposal that almost happened, the suitor who vanished, or the understanding that never materialized. You revisit it on lonely nights, usually after too much port. It lurks in the corners of your mind. That particular episode, wrapped in velvet nostalgia and a touch of mild embarrassment. Victorian single women, for all their stoic composure and outward tranquility, are not immune to the private drama of what might have been. Yours is a tale best told on stormy nights, or in the haze between finishing a second glass of port and deciding whether to start a third. It might have started at a summer garden party, or in the drawing room after supper, when everyone else was too busy dissecting the latest society scandal to notice you and the eligible Mr. Insert appropriately British surname, talking by the window. There was a look, a lingering, hopeful look, followed by an awkward silence, broken only by the clink of a teacup or your cousin's giggle from across the room. Perhaps he complimented your embroidery, or quoted poetry, or asked, quite out of the blue, whether you'd ever visited Bath. You both laughed at nothing, and suddenly, everyone else seemed very far away. Afterwards came the understanding, that ambiguous Victorian right where two people agree, through a series of meaningful glances and coded remarks about the weather, that something, someday, might be arranged. He borrowed a book and promised to return it. You practiced writing his surname on scraps of paper, then burned the evidence in the fireplace like a proper tragic heroine. For weeks, everything had the gleam of possibility. You started taking more care with your hair, made sure your best shawl was always freshly laundered, and greeted the postman each morning with more enthusiasm than was strictly necessary. Your aunt grew suspicious. Your friends grew hopeful. Even your cat started warming to the idea of a new household member, provided he brought appropriate offerings. Then, just as you were almost certain the invitation stopped, he missed a dinner. The book was never returned. Suddenly, the town was abuzz with news of his trip to Scotland, or an ailing relative, or, worst of all, an engagement to someone else, whose chief merit was an impressive dowry and a father in Parliament. You received a polite note, if that, written with the faint air of a man who couldn't quite remember your dog's name. The understanding dissolved into fog. Afterwards, life returned to its routines, but with a slightly sharper edge. You caught yourself being absurdly polite to new acquaintances, and even more scathing in your commentary on anyone's love life but your own. Your mother said, "You're better off." Your friends muttered about fate. And the family dog adopted an air of protective indignation whenever his name was mentioned. And yet, late at night, after the last cup of tea, you sometimes return to that almost proposal. It's not regret, exactly, more like a well-worn stone in your pocket, smooth, familiar, and a little heavy. You imagine alternative endings. Perhaps you'd be married now, managing a household, writing letters full of tales about children and chickens and husbands who leave their boots in the hall. Or perhaps not. Perhaps instead, you would have missed out on quiet evenings, solitary walks, and the freedom to read forbidden novels in the library, without anyone demanding to know where the biscuits went. Over time, the story becomes less of a wound and more of an old, slightly amusing anecdote, a private badge of honor in the secret society of almosts. You share it, once in a while, with a trusted friend, both of you laughing at the predictability of men and the mysterious workings of fate. So you tuck that memory away, alongside your best handkerchief and your most pointed letter opener. Life goes on. Proposals or no proposals. After all, there are worse fates than living on your own terms, with a good book, a loyal cat, and a bottle of port for the nights when nostalgia pays a visit. You're not alone. You have friends, other women, equally unwed, equally mysterious. Together, you share stories, laughter, and enough sarcasm to power the British Empire. The Victorian world may see single women as curiosities, oddities to be pitied or prodded, but within your secret circle, you are nothing short of legendary. There's comfort in the knowledge that for every family member who frets about your prospects, there is at least one friend who will gleefully dissect every failed courtship, every disastrous dance, and every well-meaning bit of advice that has ever graced a tea tray. Your group is a tapestry of personalities. The fiercely practical, the hopeless romantic, the incorrigible skeptic, and the eccentric dreamer. Sometimes all of these reside in one woman, depending on the weather and the cake. Your meetings are a highlight of the week, whether at one another's parlours, in the back pews of church, or in the semi-sanctified aisles of the lending library. where you pass the latest scandalous novel from gloved hand to gloved hand. You gather over tea, each bringing stories and snacks to the communal feast. You speak in code. So, how is the knitting project coming along? Did your cousin's proposal go up in flames yet? It's a safe space, a haven from both the world's pity and its suspicion. These friendships are forged in the fires of shared experience. You have all endured the awkward matchmaking attempts, the whispers of poor thing, and the dreaded moment when a dance card is handed back unfilled. Yet in each other's company, the sting is softened by wit and understanding. You swap stories about disastrous suitors, like the one who spent an entire picnic discussing pig farming, or the other who fainted at the sight of embroidery needles. You invent elaborate backstories for yourself. Perhaps you're a secret heiress, or an undercover novelist, or, on especially dull days, a member of an obscure European royal family, exiled for excessive cleverness. There's camaraderie in the little rebellions you share. You pool your money for trips to the theatre, exchange recipes that include dangerously liberal quantities of sherry, and write letters filled with jokes and half-truths that would make your aunts faint. When one of you gets cornered at a party by a particularly tenacious bachelor, or a relative with a bright idea, the others are quick to intervene, providing distraction or extraction as needed. It's a code, unspoken but ironclad. In the evenings you gather for informal salons, debating the merits of the latest penny dreadful or arguing whether Lord Byron was a genius or simply a man with too much hair. You read poetry aloud, sometimes your own, sometimes smuggled works by women with far less patience for society's rules. Laughter rings out, honest and unrestrained. For these few hours no one is a spinster. You are all women with minds, with stories, with plans. You plot imaginary adventures, renting a cottage by the sea, travelling to Italy, or starting a literary magazine entirely devoted to the unwed and unafraid. Support flows as freely as the tea. When one of you is sick, the others bring broth and scandal sheets. When anyone feels low, the rest are quick to remind her of her value, not as someone waiting for a ring, but as someone living a life that's hers alone. You celebrate each other's small victories, a perfectly executed cake, a witty retort to a tiresome aunt, a day spent blissfully alone with a novel and no interruptions. As the evening ends and the group disperses, you feel the gentle glow of solidarity. The world may never understand the fierce joy of your little society, but it hardly matters. In your secret circle, you are not left behind. You are moving forward together, arm in arm, unclaimed, undefeated, and, above all, unbothered. The empire can power itself. You have each other. People talk. Sometimes they whisper that you're a secret poet, or that you practice witchcraft, or, most scandalous of all, that you're perfectly content. The truth? You're just really good at minding your own business. In the small, echo-prone towns of Victorian England, privacy is a myth. The walls have ears, the hedges have eyes, and Mrs. Dabble from 3 doors down has an uncanny knack for appearing whenever you drop a letter in the post. As a single woman, you're a walking headline, your every move ripe for speculation. Did you buy extra sugar at the grocer? Clearly you're brewing something, possibly a love potion, more likely an elaborate pudding. Wear a new shawl? Either you've received a secret inheritance, or you've fallen under the spell of Parisian fashion, a fate worse than death, in the opinion of the local sewing circle. It doesn't take much to become the subject of rumour. A solo walk at sunset might set off a frenzy of curtain twitching and urgent whispers about clandestine rendezvous. Never mind that your only companion is the neighbour's overfed spaniel. An afternoon spent writing letters, or simply gazing out the window, is enough for someone to speculate that you're corresponding with a mysterious stranger or composing your memoirs, soon to be published under a scandalous pseudonym. The most persistent rumour, of course, is that you are far too content. You smile to yourself, knowing how much that rattles the local order. A woman without a husband is supposed to be pining, plotting, or in deep denial, not enjoying herself. Your apparent happiness confuses and, in some cases, enrages the neighborhood's professional worriers. No one can be that satisfied with just books and a cat, they say. While side-eyeing your vegetable patch for signs of forbidden knowledge or suspiciously well-grown carrots. Gossip, in truth, is less about you and more about the need for entertainment. In a town where the most excitement last week was Mrs. Pennington's marmalade disaster, your status as a spinster provides an endless source of stories. You become a character in a dozen small-town dramas, sometimes a tragic heroine, sometimes a villain, occasionally an unsung genius. If you happen to hum a tune the neighbours don't recognise, you can be sure that by tea time, someone will claim you're sending secret messages to the continent. Every Sunday at church, the air thrums with speculation. Did you notice that she wore her grey shawl again? Proof of a broken heart, or at least of thriftiness. Did you see the way she looked at the new curate? Scheming, clearly. It is exhausting, sometimes, to be so thoroughly misunderstood, but also oddly liberating. You find yourself inventing tiny provocations. A French phrase dropped into conversation, a suspiciously well-tended rosebush, an afternoon spent reading poetry aloud on the porch. The town obliges by spinning each new detail into a fresh, mildly unhinged theory. Occasionally, you're tempted to lean into the legend. Why not leave a candle burning late at night? Or walk home with your skirts trailing dramatically? Why not let them believe you write secret novels by moonlight or keep a lock of Lord Byron's hair tucked in your diary? If people are going to talk, they might as well have something to talk about. In private moments with your circle of spinster friends, you trade stories of the most outlandish rumours. Someone once suggested you'd been seen practicing palmistry. Another claims you're the heir to a Portuguese fortune, waiting for the right moment to abscond with the family silver. You laugh about it over tea, occasionally fanning the flames just to see how far the tale will go. But, at the end of the day, the real scandal is how content you truly are. You have built a life out of small pleasures and quiet victories. The town may never quite understand you, but that is its own kind of freedom. Let them gossip, let them speculate. As long as you're left in peace with your books, your pets, and your very mysterious smile, you're perfectly happy to remain the single woman everyone suspects, but no one can quite explain. As night falls and the wind howls through the window pane, your mind is visited by fears of old age, loneliness, and, occasionally, literal Victorian ghosts. You pull the covers up and remind yourself, tomorrow is another perfectly unremarkable day. The house is never so alive as it is after midnight, when the silence settles and every creak and sigh echoes through the walls. You lie in your narrow bed, surrounded by a fortress of starched linens and the musty scent of lavender sachets. Shadows stretch and flicker along the ceiling, cast by the sputtering remains of your candle. The air is cold, tinged with the perpetual draught that no amount of shawls or extra quilts can fully banish. In the dark, your mind slips effortlessly from the reasonable to the ridiculous. Did you remember to bank the fire in the kitchen? Will the marmalade keep until morning? Or will some enterprising local mouse make off with your last hope of breakfast? Did that letter you sent to your friend in Bath contain a devastating spelling error, destined to haunt you for months to come? But then, as the minutes tick by, deeper fears emerge. Sometimes it's the dread of old age, of becoming the subject of whispered stories, the lady who never married and now haunts her own home in a cloud of mothballs and regret. You imagine the future. Grey hair, slower steps, a house slowly growing quieter as neighbours move away or pass on. Will you be the mysterious figure children dare each other to wave at from the gate? Will the postman forget your name? The existential unease builds, layered like the blankets you keep pulling higher. Then there's the fear of being alone. Not just in the practical sense, but alone in the grand cosmic way. The sense that, despite your best efforts at companionship, human, feline, or otherwise, you are simply a brief note in the ledger of time. You recall every warning about dying an old maid, that peculiar Victorian prophecy designed to haunt the imagination at precisely this hour. Of course, being Victorian, you are contractually obligated to worry about ghosts. It's impossible not to, especially in a house that settles and groans like a dowager aunt after too much plum pudding. You've read enough novels to know that every ancestral portrait has eyes that follow you. Every faint stain on the wallpaper could be the echo of a family tragedy, and the wind itself is often accused of being an unhappy spirit. The cat does not help, pausing at the door with her tail fluffed out, staring intently at the shadowed corner as if to say, "You see it too, don't you?" But most nights, the only thing haunting your room is your own runaway imagination. You invent elaborate scenarios, an escaped convict seeking shelter, a lost love returning by moonlight, or, most alarmingly, Aunt Eugenia arriving unannounced with a list of eligible bachelors. The mind is an unruly houseguest, rummaging through your private drawers and flinging existential anxieties like crumpled handkerchiefs. To calm yourself, you perform a series of nighttime rituals, tucking the covers under your chin, reciting half-remembered prayers, mentally reviewing tomorrow's to-do list, must re-alphabetize the linen cupboard again. Sometimes you reach for your book, letting the dry wit of Miss Austen or the melodrama of Mr. Collins distract you from more insidious worries. Other times, you simply count backward from 100, matching each number to a memory or a blessing, until the darkness feels less threatening and more like a soft, familiar cloak. Eventually, exhaustion wins. You fall asleep to the sound of the wind and the reassurance that, however haunted the night may seem, morning always returns. The ghosts, both literal and metaphorical, retreat with the sunrise. You awake to another perfectly ordinary day, a cup of lukewarm tea, a faint draught under the door, and the quiet pride of having survived the night's parade of doubts. Tomorrow, the worries may creep in again, but for now, you are safe, cocooned in your bed, a little braver with every sunrise. In the end, you realize that your legacy might be a family story, a well-embroidered sampler, or a tiny fortune left to a distant nephew. But perhaps, just perhaps, you're the reason your great-niece is allowed to go to university. Victorian society is obsessed with legacy. Who gets remembered, and why? From grand marble statues in the town square to names inscribed in Bibles and brass plaques, everyone seems desperate to leave a mark. For the single woman, though, legacy is more complicated. You have no children of your own to shape or stories of marital triumph to be recited at Christmas dinners. Instead, you carve your own kind of immortality from quieter things, the books you collected, the charities you supported, the recipes you perfected, and the love you gave to anyone who needed it, whether or not they shared your surname. Of course, you are warned about your fate. From the first time you're called Miss instead of Mrs., you're reminded that unmarried women become lessons, cautionary tales whispered to younger generations. You are the aunt whose wedding china was never unpacked, the lady with the mysterious attic, or the relative whose letters are always signed affectionately and with practical advice. There is comfort in this, in knowing you have become a presence, a piece of family folklore, a footnote in the family tree, one that some future genealogist will puzzle over and perhaps envy. But legacy is not all warnings and wistfulness. In your time, you have championed your nieces and nephews, funded their piano lessons, slipped sweets into coat pockets, and introduced them to the kinds of books their mothers would have censored. You have been a confidant to your sisters, an emergency babysitter, the organizer of holidays, and the chief pie baker in every family crisis. Your home is the one people turn to for advice, a cup of tea, or just to escape the chaos of their own houses. You have left your mark in quieter, subtler ways. Perhaps you established a reading circle for girls in the village, donated to the first women's hospital, or quietly funded the education of a clever neighbour who went on to do great things. Maybe you taught your great-niece how to thread a needle and a thought, showing her that careful stitches and careful words can both build something lasting. Years from now, when the world has changed beyond your imagining, She might remember you as the first woman who told her it was possible to be both independent and kind. Even your so-called eccentricities may someday be your triumphs. The embroidered samplers, once dismissed as mere decoration, will be admired for their wit. Minding my own business since 1852 hangs over the mantel with pride. The recipes you perfected, handed down and scribbled over with each generation, will be treasured. Aunt Edith's lemon biscuits. Add a dash more zest and a spoonful of rebellion. The family will recall with fondness and a hint of awe the way you always seem to have time for everyone, and yet somehow still kept secrets of your own. Of course, there will be those who use your life as a warning. Don't end up like Aunt So-and-so, alone, with only her cat for company. But for every sigh of pity, there will be someone who sees in your story a possibility. The idea that you can choose your own path, build a life out of the small freedoms others overlook, and shape a world, however quietly, by living as yourself. In the end, you realize that being a legend or a cautionary tale depends entirely on who tells your story. Perhaps you'll be both, and that's as it should be. Some nights, when the fire is low and the world feels very small, you'll rest content in knowing that your legacy is not measured in rings or wedding lace, but in the laughter you sparked, the books you shared, and the dreams you made possible for those who came after you. Because maybe, just maybe, your greatest legacy is the permission you gave others to imagine a different kind of life, one filled with curiosity, kindness, and a stubborn refusal to fade quietly into the background. Not just a tale, but a legend. And really, what more could anyone want? Every town has one, the tireless matchmaker, armed with a list of eligible bachelors and the moral certainty of a heat-seeking pigeon. You become an expert in evasive maneuvers, ducking behind hedges, faking sudden headaches, or developing an unhealthy attachment to distant relatives in need of company in Cornwall. It's a sport, really, this daily game of social hide-and-seek. The Victorian matchmaker is not to be underestimated. She is as persistent as a tax collector and just as skilled at finding you at the most inconvenient moments, mid-bite at the bakery, ankle-deep in mud outside the greengrocer, or, most tragically, while you're escaping to the post office, hoping for a moment of solitary bliss. You sense her before you see her. A faint whiff of lavender water, the soft, predatory rustle of a well-pressed skirt, and that telltale glint of determination behind the pince nez. Your training begins early. You learn to spot the warning signs. An innocent question about your weekend plans, a sudden interest in your opinion of gardening, always a precursor to introducing you to Mr. Humble but wealthy, who's just returned from the Indies. Or the dangerous phrase, you simply must meet someone. Seasoned spinsters develop a sixth sense for these ambushes and respond with polite deflections and well-practiced vanishing acts. Feigning headaches is a classic. No one argues with a woman clutching her brow and muttering about faintness. For bolder situations, you adopt advanced tactics, such as hiding in the linen closet during peak calling hours or sending yourself letters from imaginary relatives in urgent need of help. Oh, I would love to attend the vicar's supper, but Cousin Agatha simply cannot face another thunderstorm alone. You know how she is. No one knows how she is, because Cousin Agatha is a work of fiction, but in the art of avoidance, all's fair. You become adept at using the landscape to your advantage. Duck behind a convenient hedge when you spot the matchmaker stalking the village green. Take the long route to the baker's, yes, even if it means an extra half-mile slog through the mud, because the alternative is an awkward encounter with Mrs. Smalls and her copy of Hints for the Unattached. On particularly desperate days, you cultivate mysterious new interests, collecting wildflowers at inconvenient distances, becoming a patron of obscure museum exhibits, or suddenly volunteering for any and all parish events held a safe 5 miles out of town. Social events become minefields. The moment you walk through the door, you scan the crowd for danger. The matchmaking aunt is easy to spot. She's the one with a twinkle in her eye and a nervous bachelor lurking nearby, possibly clutching a sprig of something wilted. You politely accept a glass of weak punch and position yourself near the most scandalous elderly relative you can find. There is no surer way to scare off hopeful suitors than by launching into a tale of your family's notorious great-aunt Euphemia and her collection of taxidermied stoats. At times you recruit allies. Fellow spinsters and even sympathetic married friends help run interference, staging urgent conversations or sweeping you into the kitchen for help just as the matchmaker swoops in. There is honor among the unattached. You share notes, strategies, and, occasionally, decoy engagement rings, useful for convincing the more determined meddlers that your heart and hand are already spoken for. But despite all the dodging and feints, there is a certain admiration for the matchmaker's perseverance. Her intentions are mostly good. She just cannot comprehend that happiness can come in many forms, some of which do not include shared bank accounts or monogrammed linens. You learn to handle her with grace, never too rude, always just slippery enough to keep your freedom. In the end, evading the matchmakers becomes less about avoiding marriage and more about preserving your autonomy. You learn to claim your space in the world, not as a missing puzzle piece, but as the whole picture, and as you wave to Mrs. Smalls from a safe distance, off to visit cousin Agatha, or perhaps just enjoy an afternoon nap, you feel a quiet satisfaction. You may never win the gold medal in Victorian matrimony, but in the Olympic sport of independence, you're practically unbeatable. Managing money as a single woman means walking a line thinner than your patience at a family wedding. Your allowance covers the essentials. A new handkerchief, occasional chocolates, and precisely 0 spontaneous train rides to Paris. Every shilling is accounted for. Every whim is weighed against the risk of being known as that woman who defaulted on the tea bill. Victorian single life, at least as far as the ledgers are concerned, is a masterclass in creative accounting. You are given just enough to live on, with dignity, but not so much as to risk independence or, heaven forbid, extravagance. Your funds arrive from a father's estate, a cautious uncle, or a trust set up by a relative who firmly believed women could be trusted with charity work, but never with compound interest. It begins each month with the reckoning, the ceremonial opening of your housekeeping book. You sharpen your pencil and face the long columns of outgoings. Coal, candles, rent, the mysterious item labelled miscellaneous, which usually means biscuits and regret. You tally up every halfpenny spent on the necessary and the nearly necessary, laundry, soap, boot repairs, the weekly magazine subscription you claim is for the articles. Household essentials take priority. You develop a sixth sense for market prices, able to detect the faintest shift in the cost of potatoes or the scandal of a sudden rise in tea. You learn the art of the strategic purchase, splurging on a good shawl to last the winter, but mending last year's bonnet with new ribbon instead of buying another. You ration luxuries. 1 chocolate for each letter successfully avoided from Aunt Eugenia, 2 for braving the cold market, and a third if you've survived an afternoon with the matchmaking committee unscathed. Of course, there are emergencies. A sudden leak in the roof, a pet's unfortunate encounter with the fishmonger's cart, or an invitation to a charity bazaar with an unspoken expectation of a little something for the cause. You keep a small stash for such events, hidden behind the books on etiquette. True panic only sets in if you must dip into the shilling-labelled future Paris adventure, which, at this rate, will fund exactly 1 pastry at the Gare du Nord in the year 1903. Social obligations are another minefield. There are always collections at church, last-minute requests for donations, or a friend's birthday that requires a token of esteem. You become skilled in the noble arts of regifting. Surely Cousin Mabel won't recognize this soap dish. And creative presentation. A basket of apples, how rustic and thoughtful. When in doubt, you bake. Flour and sugar are cheaper than cut glass, and a good fruitcake distracts from the absence of silver. Still, the greatest challenge is personal desire. You spot a beautiful book in the shop window, or dream of a train ride to Brighton, or contemplate a new dress in a color that would make even your sternest relative pause. But you pause too. Every wish is weighed and measured, not just for its cost, but for what it represents. To spend too freely is to risk a reputation impractical, wasteful, living above her station. No thank you. You'd rather be known as the spinster with immaculate accounts. You find ingenuity in limitation. When you long for adventure, you borrow novels from the library and journey across continents for free. When you crave new clothes, you learn to alter and embellish, turning last year's fashion into next month's unique creation. You share recipes with friends, swap flowers for seeds, and attend free lectures with the enthusiasm of a woman determined to wring every last farthing of value from her life. At the end of each month, you add up your successes and sigh over your failures. Those extra scones do add up. But the satisfaction is real. You may not have Paris, but you have peace of mind, an untarnished tea bill, and just enough left over for the chocolate. And perhaps after all, that's the most delicious freedom of all. With no dowry and nowhere to go, you're the perennial helper in a sibling's home, reading to nieces, darning socks, and absorbing stray household stress like a human lavender sachet. You're indispensable but oddly invisible, the spiritual ancestor of the family group chat nobody actually reads. Life as the unmarried sister is a lesson in strategic usefulness. When the family welcomes you into their bustling Victorian household, it's with a curious blend of gratitude, resignation, and a faint air of charity. You were allotted a modest room at the top of the stairs, just far enough from the nursery to avoid the worst of the nighttime wailing, but close enough to fetch water, wrangle lost shoes, and serve as an unofficial lookout for the dreaded visit from Great Aunt Hester. Your days are full, if not your own. Breakfast begins early, and before your first cup of tea is cool enough to sip, someone has already asked you for a favor. Read a story to the youngest child, sew a button on father's coat, keep an eye on the porridge so it doesn't burn. Your hands are rarely empty. You mend, you fetch, you settle disputes over who gets the last bun. In theory, this is a life of purpose. In practice, it's like being a live-in utility, as vital to the household as the kettle, so long as you make no demands and whistle quietly. You know every member of the family better than they know themselves. Your sister relies on your calm when the baby cries or the laundry comes back pink. Your brother-in-law confides in you about his work, the weather, and occasionally his disappointment with the plum harvest. The children love you, but in the cheerful, unexamined way they love rain and jam, ever-present, reliable, and always taken for granted. Your reward for such devotion is a peculiar form of invisibility. Family decisions are made at the dinner table, but your place is at the sideboard, ensuring the plates are filled and the pudding distributed. When visitors call, you are introduced, if at all, as our Edith. She's such a help to us. Sometimes you think you could turn invisible, and the family would only notice when a sock went unmended or the marmalade ran out. Still, you find small joys in your position. You are privy to the secret workings of the household, witness to every whispered plot and silent triumph. You become the confidant of all, children, servants, even the family pets. You know who is feuding, who is in love, and who is sneaking extra biscuits from the tin. Your advice, when given, is often ignored until it proves prescient, at which point it is received with the baffled gratitude reserved for miracles. You adapt, finding little pockets of freedom. Sometimes, after the day's chaos has died down, you steal away to your attic room with a borrowed book and a cup of cocoa, your own sanctuary above the family fray. The solitude is precious, the peace, hard-won. In these moments, you can breathe, reflect, and remember that you are more than the sum of your chores. Family law will one day remember you, perhaps not for your sacrifices, but for the way you held everything together. You will be the subject of half-remembered anecdotes, the explanation for old recipes and traditions that survive long after your name is forgotten. If you're lucky, some future descendant will read your letters, discover your hidden wit, and wonder why the family never listened to you more closely. In the end, you are both helper and ghost. Present in every moment, yet curiously overlooked, indispensable but uncelebrated. And while you may never command the spotlight, you have shaped the story more than anyone knows, quietly, patiently, and with far more grace than any group chat emoji could ever convey. So tonight, as you drift off beneath your soft sheets and the hum of a fan, safe from prying aunts, matchmaking neighbours, and the existential threat of an unexpected marriage proposal, maybe spare a thought for the Victorian single women who came before you. Their days were filled with small dignities and quiet rebellions. A hidden library book, a well-timed stroll, a perfectly executed tea party grin. They endured the endless rounds of unsolicited advice, survived being the family's perpetual extra, and somehow made it through evenings spent as both chaperone and emotional support human for everyone else's romance. They balanced society's expectations with a stubborn streak of independence, armed with nothing but a sturdy pair of boots and the world's most passive-aggressive needlework. And yes, maybe they were gossiped about, pitied, or even ignored. But in their own way, they found a kind of freedom, tiny moments of joy among the teacups and doilies, quiet strength in the face of relentless scrutiny. They didn't conquer the world, but they certainly made it more interesting. So as you close your eyes tonight, be grateful for the luxury of choice, for hot running water, for the right to read whatever you like, and for the fact that no one is currently judging your worth by the state of your embroidery. Let yourself sink into sleep, knowing that, while history was often unfair, people have always found small ways to be stubborn, hopeful, and quietly brave. May your dreams be free from lace collars and family obligations. Good night.